Imagine, you wake to the rattle of carriage wheels on wet cobblestones, the smell of coal smoke and horse dung drifting through your window. The year is 1854, and the city outside is alive, soot-stained chimneys coughing black clouds, hawkers shouting, babies wailing, and the ominous peal of church bells marking another funeral. London, Manchester, Edinburgh, it doesn't matter which corner of Victorian Britain you've landed in, the story is the same. Disease lurks in every breath of fog, every gulp of water, every brush with a doctor's hand. And here's the first cruel truth: to seek treatment in this age is not a guarantee of salvation. It is a gamble. You step into a hospital ward, and what you find is not the antiseptic white halls you know, but a cavern of damp stone, iron-framed beds jammed together, an air so thick with sweat, blood, and rot that breathing itself feels like swallowing sickness. Rats scatter under the cots. Flies buzz over bandages already stiff with yesterday's pus. And through the haze approaches your doctor, hands unwashed, sleeves still sticky from the last patient, clutching a surgical saw dulled by too many amputations. You might think, this is progress. At least there are doctors now. At least there are hospitals. But step carefully, because in this time of great ambition and rapid discovery, medicine was both miracle and murder. Every bottle, every pill, every procedure carried a double edge. Victorian Britain prided itself on being modern, industrial, enlightened. Steam trains shrieked across the countryside, telegraphs clicked messages faster than any horse could ride, and factories belched out goods for a world increasingly obsessed with progress. Yet beneath that pride was a reality so dark, so raw, that you can taste the irony. Progress was everywhere, but safety, hygiene, and true scientific understanding lagged far behind. Imagine being ill. Your chest rattles with coughs, your skin burns with fever. You seek help. What awaits? Bloodletting with unwashed instruments, purges that dehydrate you until you're half dead, bottles of sweet-tasting opium syrups that numb your pain, and quietly bind you to addiction. Even children, infants barely able to cry, were given drops of morphine to keep them quiet through the night. The cure could be worse than the disease. And yet, people trusted it. What else could they do? Death was everywhere, cholera sweeping through slums, typhus carried in lice, tuberculosis straining entire families. To live in this century was to walk hand in hand with death, and any promise of relief, no matter how poisonous, was embraced. You can picture it. A middle-class household, curtains drawn against the smoky dusk, the mother pacing as the child wheezes in a bed upstairs. The doctor arrives, hat dusted with soot, and prescribes laudanum, a mixture of opium and alcohol, swearing it will calm the child's lungs. She pours it into a spoon, holds it to trembling lips. The coughing subsides. Relief. But with every sip, the child's body grows more dependent, until one day the relief becomes the problem. This was medicine in the Victorian age, hope and harm intertwined, indistinguishable. But not all was blind fumbling in the dark. This was also the century of breakthrough, of chloroform first slipping into surgical practice, of Florence Nightingale walking hospital wards with lamp in hand, of Louis Pasteur whispering about invisible enemies too small to see. Imagine the tension of that time. On one hand, tradition, superstition, and dangerous remedies. On the other, the fragile beginnings of modern science. It was a world balanced on a razor's edge between progress and peril. And so we begin our descent into this world, a world where surgeons cut faster than they prayed, where poisons were bottled as cures, and where stepping into a hospital could mean stepping closer to your grave. The night stretches before us. The lamps flicker. We will walk together through these shadowed wards of history, past the quacks selling snake oil on street corners, past the trembling hands clutching bottles of laudanum, past the sawdust-stained floors of the surgical theater. You will see how Victorians lived, how they suffered, how they gambled with medicine. And as we move deeper, keep this thought close: medicine is never just science. It is trust, it is fear, it is desperation. In the Victorian era, it was all of these, wrapped in equal measures of brilliance and brutality. So, shall we step inside? The story begins with the doctors themselves, men of learning, men of lies, and sometimes men of both. The line between healer and fraud was thin, and often invisible. The lamps of our imagined Victorian ward gutter in their sconces, shadows sliding across cracked plaster, and we move closer, toward the men who call themselves doctors. You may expect white coats, neat stethoscopes, the quiet authority of credentials displayed on polished office walls. But here, in the mid-19th century, medicine is not yet so tidy. A diploma, if one exists at all, is less a guarantee of knowledge than a suggestion of ambition. Many who called themselves physicians never set foot inside a medical school. Others learned their trade by watching, by cutting, by failing, and sometimes, by burying their mistakes quickly before too many questions were asked. Imagine yourself in a narrow London alleyway. The fog lies thick, mingling with chimney smoke, turning every gas lamp into a hazy blur. A wooden sign creaks above a doorway: surgeon, apothecary, midwife. One man, three professions, all claimed with a flourish of paint. You step inside and the smell hits first: camphor, tobacco, stale blood. Behind the counter stands a man with ink-stained cuffs and tired eyes, offering bottles of greenish liquid with names that sound reassuring: tonic, cordial, elixir. You ask for proof of his training, and he laughs. Training? His proof is that he is still alive, that people keep returning, and that his mixtures make them feel something: relief, dizziness, numbness, sleep. These men thrived because desperation has always been the best advertisement. In cities swollen with poverty, who could afford to question a healer's pedigree? For the working poor, there was little choice. A child with a fever could not wait weeks for one of the few licensed doctors. A husband coughing blood could not pay for consultation at a grand hospital. And so the alleyway healer became both savior and scoundrel. Some of them were clever. They read anatomy texts by candlelight, copied notes from friends who had scraped into medical lectures, or apprenticed themselves to apothecaries until they picked up enough to pass as learned. Others were brazen frauds, conjurers who knew that confidence could cure more than competence ever would. Step into their offices and you might see glass jars filled with cloudy spirits, human bones bought from grave robbers, and the odd leech squirming in a jar. To the untrained eye, it looked like science. To those who knew better, it was theater. But even the so-called legitimate doctors were rarely paragons of rigor. Before the Medical Act of 1858, Britain's medical profession was a chaos of overlapping guilds and rival colleges. Surgeons, physicians, and apothecaries each guarded their privileges, sneering at one another while quacks slipped through the cracks. Anyone with a bit of Latin and enough swagger could set up practice. It was only after mid-century that licensing began to unify standards, and even then, enforcement was shaky. Imagine the terror of handing your body to a man whose scalpel was purchased second-hand, whose hands had never dissected a cadaver, and whose medical philosophy was equal parts rumor and bravado. Consider the barber-surgeon, an echo from earlier centuries still lingering in the Victorian age. In smaller towns, you might find him shaving beards in the morning, extracting teeth at noon, and bleeding patients by afternoon. His striped pole outside the shop, a remnant of blood-soaked bandages hung to dry, still spun in the damp wind. He had no formal degree, but he had steady hands and a willingness to cut when others hesitated. In a world where infection was blamed on bad air rather than microbes, steady hands seemed qualification enough. And yet these figures were not universally reviled. To many, they were familiar, even comforting. The local doctor might also sell groceries, mend shoes, or serve as parish clerk. He was woven into the fabric of the community, his remedies as trusted as they were dangerous. If his treatments sometimes killed, well, that was the will of God, or the cruelty of fate. Death was so common that blame rarely lingered. Picture the back room of a tavern, where another kind of practitioner set up shop, the traveling bone setter. These men, often self-taught, claimed miraculous skill at fixing dislocations, sprains, and broken limbs. With a twist, a yank, a barked command to grit your teeth, they wrenched bones back into alignment. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it shattered the joint beyond repair. But their patients lined up regardless, because the alternative was to wait in agony or pay a surgeon's fee they could never afford. In the dim light of oil lamps, with ale spilled on the floorboards, you watch a boy bite down on a leather strap as his arm is snapped straight. The crack echoes louder than the laughter from the bar. Quacks prospered most in cities, but they thrived in rural places, too, where isolation bred trust in anyone who arrived with bottles, powders, or even just persuasive words. They peddled universal cures, snake oil, opium tinctures, powders of mercury or antimony, each promising relief from coughs, fevers, fits, and melancholy. Some bore grand names. Professor, Doctor Extraordinary, Herbalist to the Queen. Their advertisements filled newspapers with glowing testimonies, sometimes written by the quacks themselves, sometimes invented whole cloth. But not every self-taught healer was a villain. In the folds of this rough trade lay ingenuity. Women, barred from formal medical schools, carved out space as midwives and herbalists. Many possessed deep reservoirs of knowledge passed down through generations, which roots eased childbirth pains, which teas calmed the stomach, which poultices soothed burns. They were rarely given recognition, often slandered as witches or dismissed as old wives. Yet in practice, their skills saved more lives than many a pompous gentleman with a diploma. Imagine a cold cottage on the outskirts of a village. Inside, a woman kneels by the bedside of a laboring mother, murmuring encouragement, while applying warm compresses. No degree, no lecture hall, but centuries of survival knowledge pressed into her hands. Still, the Victorian public was caught between admiration and suspicion. Was the healer a genius, or a charlatan? A man of science, or a snake oil merchant? The uncertainty only deepened as medicine itself was in flux. Germ theory was just beginning to whisper its truths. Anesthesia flickered into use, then frightened people with its risks. Traditional remedies collided with modern experiments, leaving ordinary patients unsure whom to trust. There's a story whispered about a London doctor named John St. John Long. He claimed to cure consumption, tuberculosis, the Great White Plague. His method? A secret ointment, rubbed on the skin until it blistered, followed by inhaling vapors from a mysterious machine. Patients suffered burns, fevers, agony. Some died. And yet Long grew wealthy, his waiting rooms crowded with the desperate. When hauled before court for manslaughter, loyal patients testified in his favor. They believed. They wanted so badly to believe. This was the power of the Victorian quack. He sold not just medicine, but hope. In an age where epidemics could sweep away entire streets, where hospitals reeked of death, any promise was grasped like a lifeline. Even educated men and women fell under the spell. To condemn all these practitioners as villains would be too easy. Many were as deluded as their patients, convinced that their ointments, powders, and poultices truly worked. Science was shifting beneath their feet, but they clung to the tools they knew. And in this fog of uncertainty, the respectable doctors fought their own battle. They railed against quacks in the press, lobbied Parliament for reform, and sought to professionalize their image. But in truth, they too often stumbled. Their treatments, bloodletting, mercury, opiates, were hardly safer. The difference lay less in results than in reputation. A quack might kill you with arsenic. A licensed physician might kill you with bleeding. To the corpse, the distinction hardly mattered. What mattered, though, was trust. And that was the fragile currency of the age. Families whispered about which doctor to call, which midwife to trust, which healer to avoid. Sometimes they chose well, sometimes disastrously. And always death hovered near, reminding them that medicine was never a guarantee. Now imagine walking deeper into the labyrinth of Victorian medicine. You pass from the alleyway into the drawing rooms of the wealthy, where society ladies sip dainty cordials prescribed by their fashionable physicians. You move again, into the back streets, where the poor choke down foul-tasting tonics sold for pennies at market stalls. Everywhere you turn, bottles gleam, powders shimmer, scalpels flash. Some hands hold knowledge, others hold only bravado. And you, the patient, cannot tell which is which. This was the Victorian paradox, a society drunk on progress yet poisoned by its own ignorance. Doctors without diplomas roamed freely, mingling with surgeons in frock coats and chemists in tidy shops. Together, they wove a tapestry of medicine where fraud and genius were threads of the same cloth. And as we step further into this story, the question deepens. What did these self-appointed doctors actually do? How did they treat the sick? What remedies did they trust? What rituals did they perform? What poisons did they sell as cures? The answers will lead us into darker territory still, into the world of bloodletting, of lancets glinting in candlelight, of veins opened in the belief that life itself could be balanced by letting it flow away. The lamps flicker as we leave behind the alleyway quacks and the respectable frauds in frock coats. The air grows heavier, metallic now, almost sweet with the tang of iron. We step into another chamber of Victorian medicine, the theater of bloodletting. You may think of bleeding as a medieval relic, something abandoned long before steam trains and telegraphs, but in truth it was alive and well in the 19th century. Surgeons, apothecaries, midwives, and quacks alike reached for the lancet, the leech, or the scarificator as naturally as we reach for aspirin. Fever? Bleed. Inflammation? Bleed. Pneumonia, insanity, childbirth complications, even a stubbed toe if you were unlucky enough to meet a particularly zealous practitioner, bleeding was prescribed. Because to the Victorian mind, blood was not just fluid. It was balance, it was life itself, and life could be corrected by letting it flow away. Imagine yourself seated in a cold wooden chair in a doctor's office, your sleeve rolled up, the smell of carbolic acid faint but unfamiliar, because antiseptics were new, distrusted, or absent entirely. The doctor approaches with his case, a neat leather box containing tools gleaming under lamplight. The lancet, its blade sharp but never sterile, flashes as he snaps it open. He grips your forearm with one hand, positions the blade with the other, and without pause, draws it across a vein. The sting is sharp, brief. Then warmth blossoms as your blood flows into a waiting bowl, dark, steaming, strangely hypnotic. The doctor watches, eyes narrowed, counting the drops, judging not by microbes or blood pressure, concepts yet to come, but by intuition, by how pale you look, by whether you swoon. Sometimes it is only a few ounces. Sometimes it is a pint, or two. Sometimes more, until the patient slumps, lips ashen, consciousness flickering like the flame of the lamp. Imagine the world narrowing to a pinpoint as the doctor murmurs reassurance. There, the fever is leaving you. The pressure is lessened. You will feel lighter. He means it literally. You are lighter, drained of life's river, hovering at the edge of collapse. This was not cruelty, not in their eyes. It was tradition, a theory stretching back to Galen and Hippocrates, ancient voices that still held Victorian medicine in their grip. The body was a system of humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. An imbalance caused disease. Too much blood? The solution was obvious: release it. Better to faint than to fester. Better to drain than to drown in your own fluids. At least, so they believed. Now picture a hospital ward, rows of beds lined with patients coughing, shivering, moaning. Nurses carry basins already half filled with clotted blood, the air thick with copper and sweat. A young medical student leans in, watching closely as the surgeon slices a vein, fascinated by the gush of crimson. Some faint at the sight, others are eager, intoxicated by the raw spectacle of life spilling into bowls. The floor is sticky underfoot. Somewhere nearby, a patient whispers a prayer. The sound mingles with the dripping of blood into pewter basins. Leeches, too, played their part. Apothecaries kept them in jars, writhing in stagnant water, ready to be applied to delicate places, a swollen eyelid, an inflamed throat, the tender skin of a child's chest. Imagine the sensation, cold, slimy, a squirming creature latching onto your flesh, its mouth ringed with tiny teeth, sucking steadily until it swelled like a dark grape. Physicians boasted of their skill in knowing how many leeches to apply, how long to leave them. Too few and the cure was wasted. Too many and the patient grew weak, dizzy, ghostly. But weakness itself was often mistaken for cure. The illness has been drawn out, they would say, mistaking pallor for progress. Scarificators, ingenious brass devices, offered another method. Picture a small box bristling with hidden blades, wound with a spring. The doctor presses it to your skin, releases the catch, and in an instant a dozen sharp edges flick out, slicing parallel cuts across your flesh. Blood wells up in neat lines, to be drawn away with suction cups heated over a flame. The hiss of the glass, the sting of the cuts, the dark bloom of blood rising, all part of the ritual. Patients bore it grimly, some believing it an ordeal necessary for healing, others too poor or too powerless to resist. Not every story ended in disaster. Some patients recovered, not because of the bleeding, but in spite of it. Fevers break on their own. Coughs subside. The human body heals when it can, and doctors claimed the credit. Survivors became walking advertisements for the practice. Dr. So-and-so bled me, and I rose from my sickbed. Meanwhile, those who died left no testimony. Their silence explained away as fate, or the severity of the illness, never the cure itself. But the evidence of harm grew. Soldiers bled to weakness after battlefield amputations. Women drained during childbirth slipped into death. Children grew limp in their mothers' arms, their tiny bodies too fragile to endure the loss. And slowly, doubts crept in. Was this truly healing? Or was it ritual, habit, superstition cloaked in science's garments? One story circulates often, that of George Washington, the first American president, stricken with a sore throat in 1799. Though before the strict Victorian era, the lesson carried through the century. His physicians bled him repeatedly, nearly 2.5 liters of blood in less than a day, until the great man, already ill, collapsed and died. The message should have been clear. Yet for decades afterward, bleeding continued. Even as germ theory gained ground, even as anesthesia reshaped surgery, the lancet still flashed. Old habits are stubborn. Close your eyes and imagine the aftermath. You lie in bed, arm bandaged, head light, body weak. The room spins, the ceiling seems far away, voices echo strangely. Is this health? Is this the cure you hoped for? The doctor assures you yes. You must rest. The balance is restored. But your body tells you another truth. You are closer to the edge than before. Bloodletting was more than a medical practice. It was a cultural act, a ritual of submission to authority. To be bled was to place trust in the hands of another, to surrender your very lifeblood. It was also spectacle, the doctor's tools gleaming, the crimson arc into a bull, the whispered reassurances. Medicine was theater, and bleeding its most dramatic scene. By the later 19th century, cracks in the ritual widened. New physicians, armed with microscopes and laboratory methods, began to scoff. The rise of statistics revealed uncomfortable truths. Patients often fared better when left unbled. Slowly, lancets dulled from disuse, leeches were left to die in their jars, and scarificators gathered dust. Yet the ghost of bleeding lingered. Even today, echoes remain in blood donations, in therapeutic phlebotomy for rare conditions, a faint shadow of the belief that sometimes illness can be drained away. And so, as we leave this chamber of blood, the lesson is stark. Victorian medicine clung fiercely to ancient ideas, even as progress pressed at its doors. The lancet and leech were symbols of both care and cruelty, faith and folly. To live in that age was to risk not just disease, but the cure itself. The air in our journey feels heavy now, coppery with memory. We move on, stepping away from the bowls of blood, past the jars of leeches, past the scarred wrists and pale faces of those who endured the ritual. Ahead waits another chamber, dimly lit, filled with the sweet, cloying scent of poppies. Bottles line the shelves, labeled in careful script: laudanum, tincture of opium, syrup of morphia. This will be the next stage of our story, the age of medicine sweetened with poison, where addiction was prescribed with a smile, and even infants were fed to sleep on dreams spun from the poppy. The air shifts as we leave the sticky floor of the bloodletting ward. The sharp metallic tang of iron fades, replaced by something softer, sweeter. At first it is comforting, almost floral, like dried petals in a jar. But beneath the sweetness is a weight, a cloying heaviness that clings to the back of your throat. You step into a Victorian apothecary, and the scent grows stronger. Here, the shelves gleam with bottles of amber glass. Their labels are written in looping, careful script: tincture of opium, syrup of morphia, children's soothing cordial, Godfrey's mixture. You don't yet know it, but you are standing at the heart of Victorian medicine's most dangerous paradox. Because here is opium, the gift of the poppy, medicine of unmatched power, comfort in a bottle, and poison. Imagine being ill in this age. Fever racks your body, pain gnaws at your bones, or grief keeps you from sleep. You seek relief, and the apothecary obliges. He pours a spoonful of dark, bitter liquid into a glass, dilutes it with water, and slides it toward you. This will ease you, madam. This will calm you, sir. You sip. The taste is harsh, acrid, but then warmth unfurls in your chest. Your muscles loosen, your mind grows drowsy, and the world softens. Pain recedes like a tide. Anxiety ebbs. Sleep, long denied, folds its arms around you. This is the promise of opium. And in the 19th century, it was everywhere. Unlike bleeding or mercury, this was not a cure that had to be endured through gritted teeth. It was a cure people welcomed. It worked, oh, how it worked. Coughs stilled, spasms eased, sleeplessness melted into dream. Parents gave it to children, physicians to patients, poets to themselves. Laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, was sold openly in chemist shops, advertised in newspapers, tucked into handbags and nightstands. To be Victorian was to know the taste of the poppy. Picture a respectable London household in 1860. On the bedside table stands a small bottle of reddish-brown liquid. The mother dips a teaspoon, stirs it into warm water, and offers it to her daughter, restless with fever. The girl drinks, her eyelids fluttering closed within minutes. Downstairs, the father sips from his own bottle, seeking relief from the gnaw of indigestion, the sting of gout. They do not think of themselves as addicts. They think of themselves as modern, fortunate to live in an age when suffering can be softened so easily. But behind the velvet promise lurks the chain. Because opium does not simply ease. It binds. Each spoonful lays a thread, and thread by thread the body is tied. Soon the mother cannot sleep without it, the father cannot work without it, the child grows pale and listless. And still the apothecary sells, because what law forbids it? None. What stigma attaches to it? Little. In polite society, laudanum is as common as wine. Not only the sick indulge. Writers, artists, dreamers, all are seduced. Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater, published in 1821, made laudanum infamous and alluring. He spoke of visions, of dreams more vivid than life, of palaces of light and landscapes of wonder. He also spoke of the chains, the craving, the ruin, but readers remembered the splendor. Soon, opium was not just medicine but muse. Poets like Coleridge wrote of Kubla Khan under its influence, spinning imagery from its intoxication. Painters chased colors it conjured in the mind. To take laudanum was not shameful. It was almost fashionable, a mark of sensitivity, even genius. But what of the poor? They, too, found opium, cheap, potent, sold in every slum. A penny could buy a dose strong enough to quiet hunger, to dull the ache of endless labor, to send a weary mother into sleep she could not afford otherwise. For working-class families, opium became survival. Infants were dosed with Godfrey's cordial or Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, thick with morphine, to keep them silent, while parents worked long hours. Many never woke. Autopsy reports of the time tell of tiny bodies wasted not by disease but by the syrup meant to calm them. Yet shops kept selling, because profit was profit, and grief was cheap. Step into a Victorian hospital ward and you'll see the same bottle passed along. Surgeons administered morphine injections, the newest marvel, introduced after the hypodermic syringe appeared in the 1850s. A few drops under the skin, and agony ebbed away. Patients praised the miracle. Surgeons praised the quiet, compliant bodies it left in its wake. But with every injection came dependency. Those who survived their illness often found themselves bound to a craving fiercer than the disease itself. Still, it is important to see the seduction as they saw it. Imagine a life before antibiotics, before real anesthesia, before effective treatments for cancer, tuberculosis, arthritis. Pain was constant, merciless, and medicine had few weapons against it. Opium was the one remedy that truly worked. To take it was not foolish. It was rational. It was merciful. What else could they do? Now walk with me through a chemist's shop, shelves lined with remedies. Here are neat bottles labeled paregoric, a camphorated tincture of opium. There, Dover's powder, a mixture of opium and ipecac, prescribed for fevers and colds. Here, chlorodyne, a mixture so potent it could still a man's heart if overdone. The chemist does not ask for prescriptions. He does not warn of risks. He smiles, takes your coin, wraps the bottle in paper, and wishes you health. The irony is sharp. At the very moment science was advancing, microscopes revealing cells, chemists isolating alkaloids like morphine, the most trusted medicine was also the most dangerous. The line between cure and curse blurred until it vanished. A mother dosing her child did not think of addiction. A poet sipping laudanum at midnight did not think of collapse. The apothecary did not think of ruin. They thought of relief, and relief was enough. But the consequences grew harder to ignore. Cases of opium habituation, as it was politely called, filled doctors' journals. Pale patients with trembling hands, unable to eat, unable to sleep without their dose. Families bankrupted by the cost of ever-increasing bottles. Children born frail, their mothers dosing themselves through pregnancy. Slowly unease spread. Perhaps this miracle had a darker face. And yet still, the bottles sold. Because the demand was stronger than the fear. Because pain was relentless, and suffering gave no respite. Even as temperance societies railed against gin and whiskey, laudanum slipped under the radar, cloaked in the respectability of medicine. A drunkard was shamed. A laudanum user was pitted. Both were addicts, but only one was condemned. Step closer. Hold the bottle in your hand. The glass is cool, the liquid within dark as ink. You uncork it, and the smell is sharp, medicinal, with a bitter undertone. You pour a spoonful, swallow, and within minutes the world softens. The fire in your joints eases. The grief in your chest lifts. You know, somewhere deep, that this is dangerous. But in that moment you do not care. The relief is too sweet, the oblivion too kind. This is how it begins. This is how it always begins. Opium shaped Victorian life in ways subtle and profound. It eased suffering but also numbed resistance. It soothed the crying child but silenced their voice forever. It inspired poetry and painted dreams, but also chained minds and bodies in invisible fetters. It was medicine and muse, savior and thief. And as our journey continues, you will see that opium was not alone. For laudanum had siblings, other poisons bottled as cures, other metals and minerals pressed into service against disease. Some glittered with false promise, mercury, arsenic, antimony. Others whispered sweetness, like syrups for infants laced with morphine. The Victorian faith in chemistry was boundless, but so too was its blindness. So let us step away from the apothecary now, leaving behind the rows of amber bottles, the bittersweet taste still lingering on the tongue. Ahead waits another chamber, darker still, where poisons glitter in glass jars, where mercury is rubbed into the skin as a balm, and arsenic is swallowed for beauty. Here, medicine turns from sweet to metallic, from dream to toxin. The air grows sharper as we move, tinged with the bite of quicksilver. Our next step leads us into the world of mercury and poisonous metals, where cure and poison became indistinguishable, and the treatment for disease could kill as surely as the disease itself. The apothecary's shelves grow dim behind us, but one bottle follows, its presence heavier than the rest. Laudanum. Even the name carries a kind of hush, a velvet whisper in the dark. Opium was the seed, but laudanum was the flower, distilled into a tincture of alcohol and morphine that slid easily into every corner of Victorian life. You can see it now, a glass vial filled with liquid the color of rust, the faint scent of alcohol masking the bitterness beneath. A spoon dipped into it gleams dark. The patient raises it to their lips, grimaces at the taste, swallows, and waits. And then, slowly, relief uncoils. Muscles slacken, grief ebbs, sleep descends like a heavy curtain. This was laudanum's spell, not just a medicine, but a companion. It lay on nightstands beside Bibles. It rode in handbags with lace handkerchiefs. It sat in chemists' windows between jars of peppermint lozenges and bottles of castor oil. No ailment seemed beyond its reach: headache, cough, menstrual pain, toothache, grief, even a restless mind. Doctors prescribed it. Parents measured it into children's mouths. Lovers sipped it like a secret. Poets chased visions through its haze. Step into a London townhouse in 1872. In the nursery upstairs, a nursemaid dips a spoon into a small bottle and tips it between the lips of a crying infant. Within minutes, the wailing stops, the child sleeps, the household breathes easier. No one asks about tomorrow, only that tonight is quiet. In the drawing room, the mother, pale with exhaustion, pours a few drops of laudanum into her tea, stirring until the liquid swirls amber. She sips, and the tension in her shoulders eases. Beside her, the father pours a measure neat into a glass, as he might brandy, to steady his nerves after a long day. 3 people, 3 doses, 3 threads in a tapestry of reliance. Laudanum blurred boundaries. It was medicine, yet it was indulgence. It was respectable, yet it carried the same chains as the dens where opium pipes glowed in Limehouse fog. A gentleman could keep laudanum on his desk without shame. A lady could sip it discreetly without scandal. It was not drunkenness, it was treatment. The line between necessity and pleasure vanished into the amber liquid. Writers and artists drank deepest from its cup. Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an English Opium Eater had already opened the Victorian imagination to its strange allure. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, racked by illness and sleeplessness, dosed himself heavily, his notebooks smeared with scrawled fragments of poems that seemed to tumble from dream. Elizabeth Barrett Browning used laudanum for chronic pain, her verses steeped in both its balm and its burden. To write under its influence was to walk the edge of revelation and ruin, visions blooming in 1 hour, chains tightening in the next. But laudanum was not confined to poets' garrets or sick rooms. It crept into every class. In slums, it was the poor man's escape, cheaper than gin and more reliable than bread. In middle-class homes, it was a mother's helper, a gentleman's sedative, a doctor's most common prescription. In upper-class circles, it was almost a fashion, a discreet indulgence passed without comment. A society that condemned drunkenness tolerated laudanum, because it came in bottles labeled medicine. And yet, addiction gnawed silently. Imagine waking at dawn, your hands trembling, head heavy, stomach twisting. You reach for the bottle before you rise, the way others might reach for water. Just a few drops, and the sickness eases. Another dose by mid-morning, another after luncheon, another before bed. At first you told yourself it was only for the pain, only for the sleepless nights. But now, the pain begins when you stop. The sleepless nights are when the bottle runs dry. You are not alone. Your neighbor, your doctor, your favorite poet, they too are bound by the same chain. But no one speaks of it, because laudanum is medicine, and medicine is respectable. The irony sharpens when you step into a chemist's shop. Behind the counter stand rows of bottles, their labels promising cures for everything from hysteria to neuralgia. The chemist sells them without hesitation, without prescription, without warning. You hand over a few coins, and he slides the bottle into your hand as casually as if it were cough syrup. Which, in fact, it often was. Countless patent medicines contained laudanum, soothing syrups, tonics, cordials, all laced with opium and alcohol. Their advertisements filled newspapers with grand claims. Restores the nerves, cures indigestion, relieves melancholy. No mention of chains. No mention of graves. Laudanum's danger lay in its subtlety. Gin left a man stumbling in the street, his disgrace visible. Laudanum left a woman pale and dreamy, her bottle hidden in a drawer. The addict was not shamed, but pitied, even admired for their delicate nerves. Respectability masked dependence. And so the bottles multiplied, their numbers hidden behind curtains, tucked into cupboards, carried in handbags, until they were everywhere, quietly binding a nation in opium's embrace. Some tried to stop. They poured their bottles away, only to find themselves shivering, sweating, writhing with cramps, unable to eat, unable to sleep, their minds clawing for the drug. Relapse came swiftly. Better a dose than this torment. Better to yield than to endure. Few broke free. Most carried their bottles to the grave. Yet to condemn Victorians for their faith in laudanum is too easy. Imagine living with no antibiotics, no real painkillers but this. Your child burns with fever, your joints grind with arthritis, your nights stretch sleepless and endless. What would you choose? Suffering unrelieved, or a spoonful of liquid that promised peace? You would choose as they did. You would reach for the bottle, pour, sip, sigh. You would whisper gratitude. And perhaps, in time, you too would find yourself bound. And so laudanum became the quiet heartbeat of Victorian medicine. It lulled children to sleep, calmed anxious mothers, steadied laborers, fueled poets. It was balm and chain, salvation and ruin. Its amber liquid flowed through parlors and sick rooms, through teacups and teaspoons, until it touched nearly every life. But laudanum was not the only poison disguised as cure. Others glittered with harsher brilliance: bottles of quicksilver, powders of antimony, pills laced with arsenic. These, too, were medicine. Doctors rubbed mercury into the skin of syphilitic patients until their gums bled. Arsenic was swallowed for a pale complexion, painted onto faces in the name of beauty. Antimony was taken to induce vomiting, believed to purge the body of evil humors. In each case, the cure was as deadly as the disease. So let us set the bottle of laudanum back on the shelf, its liquid glinting softly in the lamplight. Ahead lies a sharper chamber, a place of metals and minerals, where Victorian medicine dipped its hands into the earth itself, pulling out poisons and calling them remedies. The air here is heavier, laced with mercury's metallic tang, arsenic's ghostly sweetness, and the acrid bite of antimony. Step carefully, for here, the cure shines like silver, but kills like lead. The bottle of laudanum clinks softly as we set it back on the apothecary's shelf. Its sweetness fades from the air, and another scent creeps in, sharper, acrid, metallic. You taste it before you even see the jars, a tang like a penny on the tongue, a ghostly weight in the throat. Step forward, and you find shelves lined not with herbs or tinctures, but with powders and quicksilver, metals wrestled from the earth and pressed into service as medicine. Here is mercury, gleaming in shallow dishes, heavy and liquid, shimmering with a beauty that tempts the eye. Here is arsenic, crystalline, almost dazzling, white as sugar. Here is antimony, ground to a grey powder, bitter on the tongue. They look pure, they look powerful, and in the 19th century, they were trusted as cure. Mercury first. Imagine the doctor's instructions. Rub this ointment into the skin 3 times a day. The body will purge itself of disease. The ointment is thick, greasy, reeking faintly of metal. You smear it on your arms, your chest, your gums. Soon your mouth feels strange, your teeth loose, your breath metallic. Saliva pours endlessly. Your gums swell and bleed. And the doctor nods. Good, he says. The medicine is working. For centuries, mercury was the frontline treatment for syphilis. If the patient drooled, trembled, or lost their teeth, it was taken as proof that the poison was driving out the disease. Never mind that many died of the cure itself. Step into a poor man's cottage. He has the sores of syphilis, the fever, the pain. He cannot afford a hospital, but a surgeon apothecary sells him mercury ointment. The man applies it faithfully, desperate for relief. Weeks later, he is gaunt, his hair falling out, his gums blackened, his strength gone. The sores remain. The disease has not left. Instead, mercury has hollowed him from the inside, until even breathing is an effort. And yet, across Britain, across Europe, mercury continued to be prescribed, century after century, the shimmer of its surface blinding doctors to its cruelty. Now arsenic. If mercury was the scourge of treatment, arsenic was the poison of beauty. Victorian women, pale faces framed by dark curls, prized skin as white as porcelain. To achieve it, they swallowed tiny doses of arsenic pills, or dabbed arsenic-laced powders onto their cheeks. The result was indeed a pallor, because arsenic thinned the blood, destroyed the stomach lining, and drained vitality. Women sickened, their hair falling, their nails brittle, their stomachs ulcerated. But to society, they looked fashionable. To look pale was to look delicate, refined, free of the sunburnt marks of labor. And so women poisoned themselves slowly, every glance in the mirror rewarding the sacrifice. Arsenic was not confined to cosmetics. Doctors prescribed it for neuralgia, for rheumatism, for nervous complaints. It was mixed into tonics, dissolved into drinks, sold as Fowler's solution, a popular preparation that promised to invigorate, to cure skin conditions, even to ward off malaria. Imagine taking a glass of water each morning, a few drops of arsenic stirred in. At first you feel energized, even sharpened. But in time your skin mottles, your stomach burns, and your breath grows foul. Still, you keep dosing, because the doctor swears by it, and the advertisements are glowing. And arsenic lingered in places patients never suspected. Wallpaper dyed a fashionable green often contained arsenic, releasing fumes in damp rooms. Women fainted in parlors, children grew sick in nurseries, and families could not understand why. The poison seeped from the very walls, and still they admired the color, unaware it was killing them slowly. Antimony, too, had its role. This grayish metal was ground into powders, swallowed to induce vomiting, believed to purge the body of illness. Doctors gave it for fevers, for indigestion, for nearly anything. The patient doubled over, retching, sweating, trembling, and the doctor nodded. The poison has been expelled. They did not see that the poison was the antimony itself. Some households kept antimony cups. Wine poured into them would absorb enough of the metal to act as a laxative. Guests would sip, grimace, run for the chamber pot, and pronounce the evening medicinal. The ritual endured because purging was tradition, and tradition cloaked itself in logic. Step into a Victorian hospital, and you will see all three poisons at work. A syphilitic patient drools from mercury ointment, his pillow stained. In the next bed, a woman sips a tonic of arsenic drops for her pale skin, her stomach quietly ulcerating. Down the ward, a boy retches from antimony, his fever no better than before. The air is thick with disinfectant's faint tang, new ideas creeping in, but the old poisons still dominate. Science and superstition walk hand in hand, the shimmer of metals dazzling even as they destroy. Yet it is important to see through Victorian eyes. These were not fools sprinkling toxins at random. They were desperate people, armed with little knowledge, clinging to anything that seemed to work. Mercury did ease sores temporarily. Arsenic did reduce fevers. Antimony did force the body to expel. The effects were real, just not the cures imagined. In an age before penicillin, before chemotherapy, before genuine pain relief, these substances were weapons, however flawed. But the cost was staggering. Mouths ruined, bones weakened, organs scarred. Patients staggered through life weaker than before, convinced that the treatment was their only hope. Families bought more ointments, more powders, more pills, each dose tightening the grip. And so, medicine of the Victorian age gleamed with poison. It came not only in amber bottles of laudanum, but in glittering crystals, in shimmering quicksilver, in powders as fine as sugar. It was rubbed into gums, swallowed in draughts, painted on skin, breathed from wallpapers. It infiltrated every home, every body. Imagine standing in your own parlor, the wallpaper a deep emerald green, the face powder on your dresser tinged with arsenic, the ointment by your bed laced with mercury, the tonic bottle on the mantel holding antimony. You do not see poison. You see progress. You see modernity. You see medicine. And as we step out of this metallic chamber, leaving behind the shimmer of mercury and the ghostly sweetness of arsenic, another sound drifts in, the soft clink of bottles, the sing-song cry of street vendors, the cheerful labels of patent medicines. Ahead lies another world of deceit, where every ailment finds a cure in a brightly colored bottle, where advertisements scream of miracles, and where narcotics and alcohol swirl together under the name of remedy. It is the world of Victorian children's syrups and patent cure-alls. The next chapter of our journey through a medicine cabinet filled not with healing, but with hazards dressed in respectability. Good, let us step further, keeping our lantern held steady as we leave behind the metallic tang of mercury and the glitter of arsenic powders. Ahead, the air grows sweeter again, cloying and deceptively gentle. The danger now wears a smile, wrapped in ribbons and advertisements, designed not for the sick adult but for the smallest and most fragile, the children. This is the world of Victorian children's syrups, a world where innocence was quieted by morphine, and lullabies were replaced by spoonfuls of poison. Picture a London street in the 1870s. The fog hangs thick, carriages rattle over cobblestones, and on the corner a shop window gleams with bright labels, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, Godfrey's cordial, infant's quietness. Bottles lined in cheerful rows, their names promising peace, relief, silence. A weary mother pauses, her baby wailing in her arms, and her eyes linger on the words soothing and quiet. She steps inside. The chemist greets her warmly. He does not warn her of morphine, of opium, of addiction or death. He speaks only of relief, for the child, for her. A few drops in water, madam. It will calm the stomach, ease the bowels, bring restful sleep. The mother nods, her coins clinking on the counter. She leaves with hope in her hand, not knowing she carries poison home. Imagine the nursery that night. The baby's cries pierce the small room, thin and relentless. The mother, exhausted, uncorks the bottle, pours a spoonful, and tips it gently into the infant's mouth. The taste is bitter, but soon the crying falters, slows, fades into silence. The child's eyelids droop, their fists unclench. For the first time in days, peace. The mother exhales, rocking the cradle with relief. She does not know that each dose threads the child closer to the grave. Because these syrups were not mild tonics. They were laced with opiates, morphine, laudanum, even chloroform in some recipes. Infants were given enough narcotic to still their tiny bodies into unnatural quiet. And many never woke again. Doctors wrote of syrup babies, pale, limp, their growth stunted, their cries permanently silenced. Infant mortality rates soared, and yet the bottles sold, because what mother could resist the promise of rest in an age when life was already a grind of endless labor, poverty, and grief? Step into a tenement in Manchester. A family of 7 crammed into a single damp room. The father works long shifts in the mill, the mother takes in washing, and the youngest, only 6 months old, will not stop crying. Neighbors bang on the wall, tempers fray. The mother reaches for the syrup. She knows it works. She knows it buys her a few hours of quiet. She tips it into the baby's mouth and lies down herself, too exhausted to stay awake. In the morning, she wakes refreshed. The baby does not. Now imagine the advertisements that fueled this market. Bright posters promised relief for colic, teething, restlessness. Testimonials, often fabricated, told of grateful mothers praising the miracles of Mrs. Winslow's syrup. Newspaper columns carried glowing lines. No mother should be without it. Safe. Effective. Gentle. The truth, that each spoonful delivered a narcotic dose, was never mentioned. The profits were too good, the demand too great. But not all these syrups killed quickly. Many worked their ruin slowly, binding children to dependence, stunting their growth, dulling their senses. Teachers wrote of listless pupils, pale-faced and lethargic, their attention drifting. Physicians noted infants who failed to thrive, their tiny bodies weakened by the drug. And yet the bottles kept selling, because the silence they bought was priceless in a world where children were many, space was scarce, and exhaustion was constant. Even doctors were complicit. Some prescribed these syrups knowingly, believing the benefits outweighed the risks. Others turned a blind eye, preferring not to question remedies that parents demanded. A crying child was seen not as a symptom but as a nuisance to be managed. And so, opiates became childcare, their quietness mistaken for health. The cruelty lies not only in the deaths, but in the silence. Parents were rarely told the cause. A baby dead in its crib was blamed on failure to thrive, on childhood weakness, on fate. Few connected the dots to the syrup. Few wanted to. The guilt would have been unbearable. And so the cycle continued, grief feeding profit, profit feeding poison. But it was not only Britain. Across the Atlantic, in America, the same bottles lined shelves. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup was manufactured in vast quantities, advertised in every city. Its label claimed it was perfectly harmless and pleasant to take. In truth, it contained nearly 65 milligrams of morphine per fluid ounce, a staggering dose even for an adult. Generations of children were silenced by its sweetness, their mothers lulled into trust by the friendly script on the label. Imagine again the nursery, the small spoon glinting in lamplight, the baby's lips parted, the syrup sliding in. The silence that follows is heavy, unnatural. The cradle rocks, the mother hums a lullaby, her voice thick with relief. Outside, the city roars with factories and smoke, but here, for a moment, there is peace. A peace bought with poison. Eventually, critics spoke. Doctors began to publish warnings. Some newspapers dared to question the safety of these syrups. Child mortality statistics drew attention. Slowly, unease spread. But regulation lagged. It was not until the early 20th century that real restrictions began, when governments demanded ingredient labels and outlawed unregulated narcotics and over-the-counter medicines. By then, generations had already been lost to silence. The story of children's syrups is not only about opium, though. It is about the Victorian obsession with quiet, with control, with the belief that every symptom must be subdued. A baby's cry was not understood as communication but as disturbance. And medicine, no matter how cruel, was the tool to enforce silence. Now, as we step away from the nursery, leaving behind the tiny bottles and the still cradles, the silence deepens. The air grows perfumed, powdery. Another poison awaits, one not swallowed but painted on, brushed into hair, pressed against cheeks. Ahead lies the chamber of arsenic in cosmetics, where beauty itself was laced with death, and to be fashionable was to risk the grave. The cradle fades into shadow, and now you find yourself before a mirror. A young woman leans close, candlelight trembling over her face. On the dressing table are pots of powder, small jars, brushes with ivory handles. She dabs at her cheeks, her forehead, her chin, working carefully to achieve the pallor prized in Victorian fashion. Pale skin meant delicacy, refinement, the absence of labor's sun. But the powder she presses into her flesh glitters faintly with something deadly, arsenic. This is not poison disguised as medicine, not a treatment gone astray. This is beauty itself, laced with death. Arsenic had long been feared as the assassin's tool, silent, tasteless, easy to conceal in a cup of wine. Yet in the 19th century, it was also a darling of the cosmetic trade. Women sought lotions and powders that promised porcelain skin, the kind of complexion that marked you as genteel, untouched by sweat or sun. Chemists obliged with concoctions containing arsenic trioxide, ground fine and mixed into creams, powders, even soaps. Imagine the sensation: cool powder brushed across the face, leaving a ghostly sheen. At first, the effect is striking. The skin seems smoother, paler, luminous in lamplight. Friends compliment. Suitors admire. But beneath the surface, the poison seeps. It irritates the skin, causing redness, blotches, ulcers. The solution? More powder, more cream, layered on to hide the damage. And so the cycle deepens, poisoning disguised by the very poison that caused it. Arsenic was not confined to the boudoir. It hid in hair tonics, promising to thicken thinning locks, and in soaps marketed as skin purifiers. Some women even swallowed arsenic wafers sold by patent medicine companies, small white tablets that promised to maintain that coveted pallor from within. Each wafer delivered a dose of poison, slow enough not to kill immediately, but steady enough to ruin digestion, thin the blood, and weaken the body. Yet advertisements glowed with praise. For the complexion of an angel, take arsenic wafers daily. Picture a fashionable London soiree. The women sparkle in silk gowns, their faces pale as moonlight, lips reddened with cochineal, eyes shadowed by fatigue. They laugh, they dance, they dazzle. But many of them wear their poison proudly, pressed into their skin, swallowed with their supper. Behind closed doors, some vomit blood. Others collapse with strange cramps, their beauty bought at a price they never fully understood. Yet society admired the result, never questioning the means. Arsenic was not only a cosmetic. It was also a color. The rich green dye that covered wallpapers, curtains, and dresses, Chilis green, later Paris green, was made with arsenic. Fashionable parlors glowed emerald under candlelight, admired by guests, envied by neighbors. Yet those same walls released arsenic dust into the air, especially in damp rooms. Children sickened in nurseries papered with green. Women fainted in ballrooms draped in arsenic-dyed curtains. Even factory workers who produced the pigments fell ill, their hands ulcerated, their lungs burning. But the fashion was irresistible. A pale face before a green wall was the height of beauty. And here lies the cruel irony. The same society that recoiled in horror at drunkenness, at opium dens, embraced arsenic with open arms. Because it was wrapped in elegance, because it promised beauty, because it whispered of refinement. A pale complexion was not only vanity, it was status. To look pale was to declare you did not labor in fields, that your skin was untouched by poverty's sun. Arsenic was the hidden price of appearing above the struggle. Step into the chemist's shop again. On one shelf, bottles of laudanum. On another, jars of mercury ointment. And beside them, powders and wafers of arsenic, sold with cheerful labels. The chemist does not warn of side effects. He smiles, tips his hat, assures the lady customer that her complexion will glow. She hands him her coins, thinking only of her reflection in the mirror. But not every victim was willing. Some were poisoned by their very surroundings. Wallpaper and arsenic green released invisible dust into the air. Dampness made it worse. Families slept and ate and played in rooms that slowly sickened them. They coughed, they vomited, they wasted away. Doctors puzzled over the symptoms, rarely connecting them to the fashionable walls. Only later did reports expose the truth, too late for many. Even children's toys and picture books were dyed with arsenic pigments, bright colors pressed into little hands. Innocence itself became a vector of poison. And still, people clung to it. Why? Because beauty has always demanded sacrifice, and in the Victorian age, that sacrifice was literal. A pale face was worth the risk. A fashionable room was worth the sickness. To complain was to admit weakness. And so arsenic remained a companion of vanity, its glitter woven into the fabric of daily life. Consider the paradox. Arsenic was also prescribed as medicine. Doctors gave Fowler's solution, arsenic dissolved in water, for fevers, for neuralgia, even for malaria. Patients swallowed it willingly, believing in its invigorating powers. So arsenic was not only beautifier, but remedy, celebrated in advertisements and medical journals alike. How could a society so enthralled by progress suspect that its progress was poisoning it? Now imagine the mirror again. A woman leans closer, dabbing powder across her face. The candlelight catches her eyes, hollowed by fatigue, her lips cracked, her hands trembling faintly. But the mirror shows her pale, flawless, luminous. She smiles faintly, satisfied. She does not see the ulcers waiting, the weakness deepening, the poison threading through her veins. She sees only the face society demands. And so she powders again. This is the cruelty of arsenic in cosmetics. It was not forced upon people by quacks or apothecaries alone. It was embraced, sought after, adored. The victims chose it, because fashion demanded it, because status demanded it, because beauty always carries a price. And as we step back from the dressing table, leaving behind the powders and wafers, the green wallpaper and the glowing faces, another scent drifts in, pungent, chemical, faintly medicinal. Ahead lies a shelf of pills, bright and varied, unregulated, untested. Pills made of dyes, of minerals, of chemicals with names barely understood, sold as cures for everything under the sun. We are moving now into the world of dangerous Victorian pills, where progress and poison were pressed into the same tablet, and every swallow was a gamble with fate. The mirror fades, the powdered face dissolves into shadow, and we step back into the chemist's world. The jars and vials around us gleam in the lamplight, but here, on the counter, lies something new, neat rows of pills, pressed into bright little beads, polished smooth with sugar coatings. They look harmless, almost sweet. Some sparkle faintly, dyed with vivid colors. Others smell faintly of mint or anise. They are easy to swallow, easy to sell, easy to trust. And in the Victorian age, trust was their greatest weapon. A doctor, or sometimes a mere vendor, would slide a tin across the counter. "Take 2 daily," he might say. "For nerves. For digestion. For strength." The patient would nod, pocket the tin, and begin the ritual. Morning and evening, a pill swallowed with water, the body waiting for relief. But what exactly went into these pills? That was a mystery few ever solved. Unlike the bottled syrups of laudanum, or the obvious shimmer of mercury ointments. Pills were opaque, both literally and figuratively. They could contain anything: powdered opium, mercury salts, arsenic compounds, strychnine in doses small enough to stimulate rather than kill. Some were packed with dyes, brilliant reds and yellows, that were themselves toxic, derived from coal tar or lead. Others contained chalk and flour, harmless fillers masking the bitterness of the real drug. There was no regulation, no requirement to list ingredients. A pill was what its maker claimed it to be, and its effects were whatever the body endured. Imagine a Victorian woman, pale with fatigue, clutching her stomach in the night. She swallows a pair of pills advertised as female regulators, meant to ease her pain, perhaps even to bring on a delayed menstruation. She does not know that the pills contain a cocktail of herbs and heavy metals designed to shock her body into bleeding. Sometimes they worked. Sometimes they poisoned. Sometimes they killed. But the advertisements made them sound gentle, respectable, even discreet. The pill culture thrived because it offered something new: control. Liquids had to be measured, ointments smeared, powders mixed. Pills, by contrast, were neat, modern, scientific. A measured dose pressed into a perfect sphere. Swallow and forget. Medicine simplified, dignity preserved. No bitter taste, no mess. Just trust in the progress of chemistry. But the progress was blind. Consider the pills sold as stimulants for men, promising vigor and virility. Many contained strychnine in low doses. Taken carefully, strychnine sharpened alertness, increased muscular contraction, even gave a fleeting sense of energy. Athletes used it, soldiers took it, lovers trusted it. But the line between dose and death was razor thin. Too much, and the body convulsed violently, muscles seizing, jaw locked, breath choked off. More than one hopeful man collapsed, writhing, his vigor transformed into agony. Then there were the sedatives, pills laced with chloral hydrate, bromides, or opium derivatives. Marketed to calm hysteria, to quiet nerves, to soothe sleeplessness, they left patients dazed, dependent, unable to function without them. Like laudanum, they blurred the boundary between treatment and addiction. A lady might carry them in her reticule, swallowing one discreetly before a social gathering, her calm admired by all. No one saw the tremors when she went without. Patent pills for digestion were equally perilous. Many contained mercury chloride, known as calomel. A common prescription for constipation, calomel worked by irritating the intestines, forcing them to contract. But repeated use corroded the gut lining, inflamed the mouth, and poisoned the body with mercury. Patients often lost teeth, their gums turning black, their tongues swollen. Still they kept swallowing, convinced the pills were cleansing them of impurities. Children, too, were given pills. Tiny sugar-coated beads, slipped into mouths to ease fevers, to calm coughs, to treat worms. The colors were bright, the taste sweet, the trust absolute. Mothers praised their convenience. Doctors praised their modernity. The children had no voice in the matter, no choice in the dose. Some grew weak, others wasted away. But the pills remained popular, their dangers hidden behind the sheen of progress. Advertising was the true engine of the pill trade. Newspapers brimmed with testimonials. "My stomach is cured. My melancholy lifted. My strength restored." Often these words were invented, written by the manufacturers themselves. Tins were decorated with gilded lettering, names that inspired confidence: Dr. James's fever pills, Beecham's pills, Dr. Bateman's pectoral drops. Each carried the aura of authority, whether or not a real doctor had touched them. And the public, weary of pain and desperate for relief, swallowed them eagerly. Step into a Victorian home, and you will find tins of pills tucked in drawers, carried in pockets, lying on mantels. They were as common as tea, as ordinary as bread. A pill for a headache, a pill for nerves, a pill for bowels, a pill for sleep. Life itself seemed to require a pill for every moment. And behind each swallow lay the risk of poison. Consider the irony. At the very moment medicine was becoming more scientific, microscopes revealing microbes, chemists isolating alkaloids, the public placed its trust in pills that were untested, unregulated, and often lethal. Science had become a mask for fraud, chemistry a cloak for poison. Progress was not measured in safety but in sales. And yet not all pills were deadly. Some contained harmless herbs, chalk, or sugar, placebos that offered relief through faith alone. Patients praised them, swore by them, passed them on to neighbors. In some cases, the belief in cure was as powerful as the cure itself. But the danger was always present. Without labels, without oversight, every swallow was a gamble. Would it heal? Would it harm? Would it kill? Now imagine the chemist's counter again. The tins gleam under lamplight. Your hand hovers. You are tired, in pain, desperate. The advertisements echo in your mind, promising relief, energy, peace. You choose a tin, press your coins onto the counter, pocket your pills. That night you swallow two, then lie back, waiting. Perhaps you will wake stronger. Perhaps you will never wake at all. This was the Victorian pill. Progress in miniature, poison in disguise, trust pressed into a perfect sphere. They promised everything, delivered little, and cost more lives than anyone wished to count. And as we leave the chemist's shop, the clink of tins fading behind us, another sound grows louder, a harsher sound, metallic and cold. It is the scrape of iron against bone, the rasp of a saw, the clatter of surgical tools dropped into a basin. Ahead lies the operating theater, a place of blood and terror, where pills and syrups give way to knives and saws. Our next step leads us into surgery without antiseptics, where the operating table was as much a battlefield as any war, and infection lurked in every cut. The first thing that strikes you is the smell. Not sharp and sterile, as you might expect from a modern hospital, but thick, rancid sweat, old blood, decay. The walls are spattered, faint stains layered one atop another like a grim palimpsest. The floor is sticky with sawdust meant to soak up what spills. And it always spills. At the center stands a wooden table. Sturdy, rough, its surface gouged with knife marks. This is not a table for dining. It is for sacrifice. Around it, instruments gleam faintly in lamplight. Saws, scalpels, forceps, all laid out on trays of wood or pewter. None of them have been washed since their last use. They do not shine with cleanliness, but with the sheen of dried blood and grease wiped away by the surgeon's sleeve. To clean would mean to waste time, and time is the one resource Victorian surgery never seemed to have enough of. Now picture the patient. He is brought in by orderlies, already pale, eyes wild with fear. Perhaps he has been injured in a factory accident, an arm crushed by machinery. Perhaps he carries a musket ball in his leg from one of Britain's endless wars. Perhaps infection has spread so far that the only hope is amputation. He is laid on the table, strapped down, though the straps are often more symbolic than secure. Men have been known to break them in their agony. There is no antiseptic spray, no sterile gloves. The surgeon rolls up his sleeves, hands bare, perhaps still bearing ink stains from writing letters earlier. He does not scrub. He does not mask his face. Instead, he flexes his fingers, chooses his saw, and nods for the assistants to hold the patient steady. Anesthesia exists now, yes, ether and chloroform, but it is risky, uneven. Many surgeons still distrust it, believing speed to be the safer choice. A quick cut, a swift saw, and it is over before shock can set in. Imagine lying there, wide awake, smelling your own fear, hearing the clink of tools. The surgeon leans close, and in seconds the knife bites deep. Pain floods you, white-hot, searing, like fire racing through your veins. You scream, you thrash, but strong hands pin you down. The saw begins its rasping rhythm. The sound is obscene, a carpenter's song in a place of flesh. Each stroke vibrates through your bones, each tug sends agony up your spine. The crowd of students in the gallery, yes, there is a gallery, lean forward, notebooks in hand, some pale, some eager, all watching. Because surgery is theater. And you, unwilling, are the play. Blood gushes, spraying onto aprons, dripping onto the sawdust below. The surgeon works quickly, his face grim, sweat beading his brow. He cannot afford hesitation. The faster he cuts, the greater the chance the patient survives the shock. But speed is not always precision. Saws slip. Arteries are missed or severed too soon. Bones splinter. More than one patient leaves the table in pieces, only to die hours later of shock or blood loss. And those who do not die immediately still face a greater enemy, infection. The instruments are never cleaned between patients. Surgeons wipe their blades on aprons stiff with old gore. Their hands, unwashed, carry the filth of the ward. The very saw that cuts through your flesh may still bear fragments of another man's bone. Germ theory is not yet accepted, not fully. The surgeon believes that bad air or miasma causes infection, not the invisible life clinging to his tools. And so wounds fester. Within days, fever grips the patient, the stump reddens, pus flows. Hospital gangrene, they call it, a rotting that spreads until the whole body is consumed. Few survive it. Many beg for death as the stench of their own flesh fills the ward. Picture the operating theater itself, rows of wooden benches rising around the table, students packed shoulder to shoulder, eager to learn. They scribble notes, sketch diagrams, whisper commentary. Some faint at the sight, their notebooks slipping from their hands. Others grin, exhilarated, as the saw scrapes through bone. The surgeon is both teacher and performer, his speed a point of pride. Records are kept of who can amputate a leg in under 2 minutes, who in 90 seconds. They are lauded as heroes of efficiency, their reputations built not on survival rates. Those are too grim, but on spectacle. And yet, for all the horror, there is a strange kind of progress here. Surgery is no longer only the last resort of butchers and barbers. It is becoming a profession, studied, debated, refined. New tools appear, clamps, retractors, bone saws with finer teeth. The hypodermic syringe begins to change the administration of drugs. Anesthesia, though feared, is gaining ground, with chloroform whispered of as a blessing despite its dangers. And in quiet corners, men like Joseph Lister begin to suspect that cleanliness, carbolic acid, and the strange new germ theory might hold the key to survival. The seeds of modern surgery are being planted, even in soil drenched with blood. But for the patient on the table, these whispers are distant. For him, there is only the saw, the knife, the pain, and the fever to come. Imagine lying there afterward, your stump bandaged in linen that was washed last week, dried on a line where flies settled. The room is damp, crowded, filled with groans of other patients. Rats scuttle beneath the cots. The smell is overwhelming, blood, sweat, pus, and death. You drift in and out of consciousness, praying for survival, dreading the fever. Days pass. If you are lucky, your wound begins to close. If not, the infection spreads, your body wastes, and you are carried out feet first. And yet people came willingly. Because the alternative was worse. A crushed limb left untreated meant certain death. A tumor ignored meant agony until the grave. Surgery, brutal as it was, offered a sliver of hope. Hope is a powerful thing, stronger even than fear. And so men and women submitted themselves to the table, trusting in the surgeon's hands, gambling their lives on a knife's edge. Now listen, the rasp of the saw fades, the groans of the ward grow distant. Ahead, another sound rises, a hiss, a soft bubbling, the faint sweetness of chemicals in the air. We are moving now into another chamber of this grim journey, where relief seemed finally at hand, where ether and chloroform offered escape from pain. But here, too, the gift was double-edged, for anesthesia could lull you into peace, or carry you into death. Our next step takes us into anesthesia's double edge, where the Victorian dream of painless surgery became both miracle and nightmare. The rasp of the bone saw fades, leaving only echoes in the dark. For a moment there is stillness, then, faintly, another sound reaches us. A hiss, like steam escaping from a kettle. The clink of glass against metal. And beneath it, a sweetness in the air, sharp and chemical, almost intoxicating. We have stepped into a new chapter of medicine's story, one that promised a revolution: anesthesia. Imagine the terror of surgery before this discovery. You are strapped to a table, wide-eyed, awake, every nerve screaming as knives bite and saws rasp. The surgeon's only mercy is speed. And then, imagine hearing whispers that pain can be banished, that you might lie down, breathe a vapor, and sink into sleep while the knives work without agony. For the Victorians, this was no less than a miracle, a gift from the gods of science. But like every miracle in this age, it was double-edged. The first to enter the theater was ether, a liquid that evaporated into fumes sharp and acrid. Surgeons soaked cloths, pressed them to patients' faces, and told them to breathe. The taste was harsh, metallic, the lungs burned, the throat choked, but then, slowly, a heaviness spread. Limbs grew leaden, voices slurred, the world tilted, and consciousness slipped away. Surgeons cheered. Patients lay still. At last, they could cut without screams. But ether was dangerous. Too little, and the patient thrashed awake mid-surgery, the saw jerking as shrieks filled the theater. Too much, and the patient's breathing slowed, faltered, stopped. Death, swift and silent, from a dose meant to heal. Surgeons were not chemists. They guessed, they improvised, they learned by trial and fatal error. And families, desperate for relief, consented, gambling their loved ones' lives on a cloth soaked in chemicals. Then came chloroform, smoother, sweeter on the breath, quicker to act. It spread like wildfire across Britain after Queen Victoria herself inhaled it during childbirth in 1853 and declared it a blessing. If it was safe for the Queen, it was safe for her subjects, or so the public believed. Chloroform swept through hospitals, through maternity wards, into parlors where midwives carried it in vials. Mothers sighed in relief, surgeons praised its quiet power. But chloroform was a silent killer. Unlike ether, its overdose did not always announce itself with coughing or gasping. One moment a patient was breathing, the next their heart simply stopped. No warning, no chance to adjust. Cases piled up of men, women, even children who slipped into sleep and never woke again. Doctors debated fiercely, was the risk worth the relief? Some swore it was barbaric to deny anesthesia. Others insisted it was barbaric to risk death when speed could suffice. The argument cut through the profession like a knife, dividing surgeons into camps of hope and fear. Step into a Victorian operating theater at the height of chloroform's reign. The patient lies on the table, trembling, eyes wide. An assistant approaches with the handkerchief folded carefully, soaked in clear liquid. He lowers it over the patient's face. The sharp sweetness fills their nose, their throat, their lungs. They cough, they struggle, but hands hold them down. Breathe, the surgeon orders. And then, slowly, their eyes roll back, their body slackens, the world dissolves into darkness. The saw begins its rasp. For once, there is silence. The gallery of students watches in awe. The patient does not scream. For the first time in history, pain has been stolen away. But now imagine another scene. The same cloth, the same sweet fumes. The patient breathes deeply, their limbs relax, their chest rises and falls, slower, slower. Then it stops. The surgeon leans close, frowns, shakes the patient's shoulder. No response. Panic flickers. The students murmur. Someone pumps the chest, slaps the face, prays. But nothing brings them back. The surgery never begins. The cure has killed before the knife ever touched the skin. Such stories haunted the Victorian imagination. Newspapers carried lurid accounts. Brides-to-be dying on the table, mothers perishing during childbirth, men who went under for a simple tooth extraction and never returned. Yet still, people sought it. Because the alternative, the raw scream of conscious surgery, was worse. Better to risk silence than endure certain agony. Better to gamble with death than face pain guaranteed. Anesthesia changed more than the patient's experience. It transformed surgery itself. When patients no longer thrashed or screamed, surgeons could take their time. They attempted deeper cuts, more delicate operations. Tumors could be excised, internal organs reached, bones carefully reset. The scope of surgery widened because pain no longer dictated speed. But infections still waited in the wings, and many who survived the knife still died days later of sepsis. Anesthesia bought time, but without antiseptics, time was often a curse. And beyond hospitals, chloroform and ether drifted into homes, into parlors, into the hands of amateurs. Some used them for toothache, for restless children, for curiosity. Accidents abounded. A father holding a cloth too long over his son's face. A curious maid inhaling too deeply and never rising. Even lovers, experimenting in the dark with sweet fumes, sometimes did not wake to morning. The gas lamp glow of Victorian nights was thick with the scent of risk. Yet it was Queen Victoria's endorsement that gave chloroform its lasting crown. When she declared childbirth with chloroform a mercy, the public embraced it. Pain, once seen as divine punishment, was now negotiable. Women demanded it. Surgeons supplied it. And though tragedies continued, the tide of progress could not be turned back. Pain, once unavoidable, had been shown to be optional. And that knowledge was intoxicating. Still, the unease never left. Surgeons whispered prayers before applying the cloth, assistants held their breath, families clutched each other in waiting rooms. No one knew if this dose, this drop, this breath, would soothe or slay. Each surgery was a gamble not only against disease, but against the very cure. Picture yourself on that table. The handkerchief descends cool and damp against your lips. You breathe, cough, gag, then breathe again. The sweetness fills your head, your limbs grow heavy, the edges of the world blur. You feel yourself slipping, as if down a dark well. Voices echo, distant. Hands hold yours, but you can no longer grip. Darkness swallows you whole. And somewhere above, steel meets flesh. Will you rise again? Or is this the last breath you will ever take? That was anesthesia's double edge, mercy and murder bound in the same bottle. It reshaped medicine, redefined surgery, and changed the way Victorians understood suffering. But it also carried fear like a shadow, a reminder that progress always exacts its price. And as we leave this chamber, the sweetness of chloroform fading into the damp air, another smell rises. Not chemical, not sharp, but foul. The stench of sweat and rot, of unwashed linen and overflowing chamber pots. The smell of hospitals themselves, those breeding grounds of pestilence where even the luckiest patient might leave worse than they arrived. We are walking now into filthy Victorian hospitals, places where the cure was often more dangerous than the disease, where pestilence lurked in every corner and death walked the wards with quiet footsteps. The handkerchief slips from your face, the last ghost of chloroform fading from your lungs. You open your eyes, and for a moment you think you've been spared. But then the smell hits you. Not the sharp tang of chemicals, not the sweetness of opium, but something older, earthier, fouler. It seeps into your nostrils, clings to your tongue, settles in your stomach. It is the smell of unwashed bodies, of sweat soaked into linen never properly laundered, of pus leaking through bandages stiff with old blood, of chamber pots too long ignored. This is not the scent of healing. This is the stench of the Victorian hospital. Step forward. The ward stretches long, rows of iron-framed beds pressed close together, hardly space to walk between them. On each bed lies a patient, some moaning, some silent, some already cold. Sheets, when they exist, are yellowed and damp, the straw mattresses beneath crawling with lice. Rats scurry in the shadows, emboldened enough to dart across the floor in broad daylight. Flies hover over wounds left uncovered, their buzzing a constant refrain. And through it all, the groans, the whispers, the prayers. The walls are high, windows smeared with soot, the air heavy with coal smoke mingling with the scent of sickness. Ventilation is poor, for doctors fear drafts more than they fear contagion. Curtains, thick with dust, trap the staleness inside. The word miasma lingers on every physician's lips. Bad air, they say, is what spreads disease. And so they seal the windows tighter, ensuring that the foulness grows richer with every passing hour. Now look at the patients. Here is a man fresh from the factory, his leg crushed in machinery. The surgeons amputated swiftly, but his stump festers, bandages soaked with pus. Next to him lies a woman feverish with childbed infection, her sheets damp with sweat, her skin flushed scarlet. Beside her, a boy gasps with pneumonia, his thin chest rattling with each breath. They lie side by side, their illnesses mingling in the air, every cough and sneeze another thread in the tapestry of contagion. There are no isolation wards. Typhus shares space with tuberculosis, cholera with measles, surgical wounds with gangrene. The hospital is less a place of cure than a gathering ground of diseases, each feeding upon the other, each patient another vector. To enter these wards is to roll dice with death. And yet they come. The poor especially, for they have no choice. At home, there is no doctor, no medicine, no comfort. The hospital at least offers a bed, a roof, someone to look in on them. But many families whisper the same dread. To go into hospital is to go into the grave. They are not wrong. Survival rates are grim. The unlucky die swiftly. The lucky may stagger out weeks later, scarred but alive. Now follow me down a corridor. The floorboards creak, the walls drip with damp. At the end, double doors swing open to the surgical theater. We were here before, where knives flashed and saws rasped, but now see it in context. After the amputation, the patient is wheeled back into the ward, his wounds still raw, his bandages already stained. The saw was never cleaned. The surgeon's coat is stiff with gore, worn like a badge of honor. His hands, unwashed, carry the infections of a dozen others. Within days, the stump begins to rot. Fever sets in. The term hospital gangrene echoes through the ward like a death knell. It spreads quickly, one bed to the next, as if the very air carries the rot. And still, the surgeons deny the invisible hand of microbes. They blame miasma, they blame the patient's constitution, they blame fate. Consider the women in maternity wards. They come here to give birth, hoping for safety, but instead many are carried out in coffins. Childbed fever, puerperal fever, stalks these halls. Doctors and students move from one delivery to the next without washing their hands, carrying death from mother to mother. The screams of labor give way to the delirium of fever, the sweet stench of decay rising from bodies that only hours before had been full of life. In some hospitals, the death rate for mothers climbs as high as 1 in 4. Yet still they come, because to give birth at home without help can be just as deadly. And here, in the midst of this carnage, reformers begin to whisper. Florence Nightingale walks the wards during the Crimean War, lantern in hand, and sees what filth has wrought. She writes of ventilation, of cleanliness, of light. She scrubs floors, insists on fresh linen, demands open windows. Mortality rates drop, not from new medicines, but from soap and sunlight. Back in Britain, she brings her lessons, fighting a tide of tradition that resists her every step. At the same time, Joseph Lister begins to experiment with carbolic acid. He sprays it in operating theaters, washes his instruments in it, dresses wounds with it. His results are staggering. Survival improves, infection decreases. Yet many colleagues mock him, dismissing the idea that unseen microbes cause disease. They cling to miasma, to bad air, to superstition cloaked in science. And so, while some wards slowly transform, others remain death traps well into the late century. Picture the contradiction. In one hospital, a surgeon strides proudly in his blood-stained frock coat, never washed, believing it proof of his experience. In another, a younger man cautiously disinfects his scalpel, his colleagues sneering at his fussiness. Patients in the first ward die by the dozens. Patients in the second begin, quietly, to live. But change is slow. Too slow for countless souls who pass through these filthy wards, their final days spent surrounded by stench and moans. Step outside for a moment. The hospital looms behind us, its windows glowing faintly in the smog. Families linger at the gates, waiting for news, clutching shawls against the chill. A nurse emerges, her apron stained, her face drawn. She shakes her head. Another gone. The family wails, collapses, then leaves, their grief swallowed by the city's endless noise. This scene repeats daily, hourly. The hospital devours, as often as it heals. And yet, within these walls, modern medicine is being born. It is here that statistics are gathered, that patterns emerge, that reformers fight their battles. The filth forces the question, why do so many die? And in asking, answers begin to take shape. Germs, hygiene, antisepsis, sanitation. The Victorian hospital is a paradox, a chamber of death that becomes the crucible of progress. But for now, for those who lie in the iron beds, for those who breathe the foul air, for those who trust their bodies to unwashed hands, the progress is distant, the future unseen. They know only the smell, the pain, the silence of their companions slipping away in the night. Now listen closely. Amid the groans of the ward, another sound calls. Not the cry of the sick, but the shout of the street. Outside, hawkers call their wares, bottles clink in crates, and voices sing the praises of miracle cures. For beyond the hospital's filth lies another world of medicine, not in wards or theaters, but on the street corner and in the newspaper, sold in bright bottles with bold claims. We are stepping now into the land of patent cure-alls, where alcohol, narcotics, and false promises are dressed in shiny labels, and hope is sold by the spoonful. The hospital gates close behind us, their hinges groaning. The smell lingers still in your clothes, but outside another scent cuts through, alcohol, sweet syrups, herbal tinctures mixed with something sharp and chemical. The air is alive with voices, vendors shouting, paperboys hawking broadsheets, advertisements pasted on every wall. And everywhere you look, you see the shining promise of medicine bottled and branded, cure-alls. Imagine walking through a Victorian street market. Stalls grown with fruit, fish, and bread, but it is the apothecary's stand that draws the crowd. On its table are dozens of glass bottles, some emerald, some amber, some clear. Each bears a label written in bold script, Dr. Bateman's pectoral drops, Godfrey's cordial, Holloway's pills and ointment, Swaim's panacea. The names sound reassuring, authoritative, almost holy. Their sellers cry out like preachers. Step right up! A cure for gout, for fever, for melancholy. Restores vigor, clears the complexion, strengthens the nerves. The crowd presses closer, coins clinking, hands eager. Because in this age, hope is worth any price. Patent medicines were not new, but in the Victorian century they reached their golden age. For a few pennies, or a few shillings, if you wanted the fancy imported kind, you could buy relief from any ailment, real or imagined. No doctor's fee, no hospital wait, no shame of illness. Just swallow the tonic, rub in the ointment, and believe. But what were these cure-alls really made of? Step closer to the stall. A bottle is uncorked. The smell hits you, strong alcohol, enough to sting your nose. Many of these medicines were little more than flavored spirits. In a society where respectability frowned on public drunkenness, especially for women, a bottle labeled medicine offered a loophole. A lady might drink freely of her tonic, without scandal, her flushed cheeks excused as health. A laborer might ease his pain with cordial, without admitting to gin. Patent medicines were often just drink by another name. Yet alcohol was the least of it. Many cure-alls hid stronger narcotics. Laudanum, morphine, cocaine, all found their way into these bottles, disguised under fancy names. Soothing syrup for infants, nerve tonic for the weary, invigorating elixir for men, all were laced with drugs that dulled pain, quieted nerves, lifted moods, and bound users in invisible chains. Customers praised them as miracles, never realizing they were becoming dependent. Some bottles contained poisons in small doses: arsenic, mercury, antimony, believed to purify the blood or invigorate the body. Others were packed with herbal brews of questionable value, colored with dyes that leached lead or coal tar. Few were tested. None were regulated. The only measure of success was sales. Advertising was their greatest weapon. Newspapers brimmed with glowing testimonials. My cough of 10 years vanished in a week. My daughter, once pale and sickly, now dances with vigor thanks to Dr. X's tonic. Posters plastered walls, showing smiling families, rosy-cheeked children, vigorous elders. The message was simple: whatever ails you, this bottle holds the cure. And people believed. Who wouldn't, in an age where real medicine was often more brutal than the disease? Picture a weary seamstress, her fingers cramped from endless hours of work. She spends her last coins on a bottle of invigorating cordial. That night she sips, feels warmth spread through her body, feels the ache ease, feels her spirits lift. She praises it, tells her friends, buys another. Weeks later, she cannot sleep without it. Her hands tremble when the bottle runs dry. But she does not call it addiction. She calls it medicine. Or picture a grieving father, his son pale and coughing with consumption. The doctor can offer little: rest, fresh air, perhaps bleeding. The father instead buys Swaim's panacea, advertised as a cure for tuberculosis. He gives it faithfully, watching his son grow weaker, still believing until the last breath that salvation is only a bottle away. The label was never honest. The hope was always false. But hope was what he bought. The fraud was not confined to street hawkers. Respectable shops sold these remedies, their shelves lined with glowing bottles. Even the wealthy indulged. In drawing rooms, fashionable ladies sipped their tonics. Gentlemen carried pills in their waistcoats. Children were dosed with cordials. Patent medicine was not the desperation of the poor alone, it was the habit of a nation. And yet some of these so-called cure-alls did provide relief. Alcohol dulled pain. Opium soothed coughs. Cocaine lifted energy. For a moment they worked. That fleeting comfort was enough to convince people they had found a miracle. The harm came slowly, creeping beneath the surface, hidden until too late. Reformers railed against them. Doctors published warnings, governments debated regulation. But manufacturers grew rich, their influence powerful. Advertisements drowned out criticism. By the late century, the trade was global. British bottles shipped to colonies, American tonics sold in London, remedies hawked in every language. The world drank deeply of false hope, and only later counted the cost. Now imagine standing again at the stall. The vendor holds out a bottle, its liquid golden in the sun. He promises vigor, strength, joy. Your body aches, your heart is heavy, your hope is thin. Do you take it? Do you pay? Do you drink? Most did. And for a moment, perhaps, they were glad. This was the paradox of patent cure-alls. They were fraud, yet they were comfort. They deceived, yet they soothed. They shortened lives, yet they made those lives briefly bearable. To condemn them outright is to forget the desperation that made them thrive. In a world where doctors cut and bled and poisoned, a sweet-tasting tonic felt like mercy. But mercy came at a cost. Addiction spread quietly. Families bankrupted themselves on bottles. Children were buried whose only medicine was syrup that silenced them forever. The cure-all industry glittered, but beneath its sheen lay endless graves. And as we step away from the crowded stall, the hawker's voice fading into the fog, another sound emerges. Softer this time, more private. The clink of teacups, the murmur of voices in parlors, the hushed tones of families debating who to trust, who to pay, who to believe. Because medicine was not the same for everyone. The wealthy sipped their tonics in fine china. The poor drank theirs from chipped mugs. The wealthy could pay surgeons for private care. The poor lay in crowded wards. The story of Victorian medicine is not only of cures and poisons, but of class. Our next step carries us into the contrasts of wealth and poverty, where survival itself was dictated by money, and where medicine drew sharper lines between rich and poor than any scalpel could cut. The market stalls fall away, and in their place rises a tall townhouse, its stone facade blackened by soot but its brass knocker polished bright. Step inside, and the smell changes immediately. No stench of unwashed linen here. The air smells of beeswax polish, faint lavender, coal smoke carefully managed by servants. In the drawing room, a lady sits in a high-backed chair, her gown heavy with silk, her hair coiled neatly. On the side table rests a porcelain teacup, and beside it, a small vial of laudanum, its glass cut fine, its label tidy. When her nerves grow too sharp, she tips a few drops into her tea, stirring gently, sipping with the same delicacy as if it were cream. For her, medicine is private, discreet, cushioned by wealth. A doctor calls at the house, removing his hat respectfully, entering with a leather bag of instruments. He is not one of the back-alley quacks or stall sellers. He studied in Edinburgh, perhaps even Paris. He charges dearly, but the family can afford it. He takes the lady's pulse, looks into her eyes, prescribes tonics and rest. If she grows gravely ill, she may be moved to a private nursing home, not the public hospital. For her, illness is a trial, but not a sentence. She has comfort, privacy, and some measure of safety. Now step outside, cross the street, and walk 2 alleys deeper into the city's belly. The smell changes again. Raw sewage, rotting food, sweat from bodies packed into cramped tenements. Here, a mother sits on the floor beside a straw mattress where her child lies, lips blue, chest rattling with consumption. She has no doctor to summon. No leather bag arrives at her door. Her medicine is whatever the local vendor sells cheap. Godfrey's cordial, opium syrup, perhaps a handful of pills bought for pennies. She tips the syrup into the child's mouth, praying for silence, for rest. But the child weakens further, until the breath stops altogether. She weeps, but she is not alone. Every family in this street has lost 1, 2, sometimes half their children. Illness here is not a trial. It is the rhythm of life. This was Victorian medicine's cruelest truth. Wealth drew the line between survival and death. Hospitals existed, yes, but for the poor, they were last resorts, dreaded as places of death more than healing. The wealthy could avoid them, hiring private physicians, paying for clean rooms and attentive care. The poor had no such shield. They entered the wards only when illness grew unbearable, and often never walked out again. Picture a gentleman's surgery in a wealthy district. The walls lined with books, the air scented faintly with tobacco and polish. The doctor examines his patient with calm authority, writing out prescriptions in neat Latin script. He recommends a tonic imported from France, perhaps a rest in the seaside town of Brighton, fresh air to soothe the lungs. The patient nods, already imagining the journey, the salt breeze, the comfort of clean lodgings by the shore. Now picture the dispensary in a working-class neighborhood. Crowds press at the counter, coins clutched in grimy hands. The chemist doles out powders and syrups, his shelves crammed with cheap patent medicines, bright labels hiding their dangers. No seaside cure here, no retreat to Brighton. Just bottles of laudanum, enough to dull pain, enough to quiet the hungry child, enough to keep going one more day. Class shaped not only access to care, but also perceptions of illness. For the wealthy, pale skin and delicate nerves were fashionable, a sign of refinement. Doctors spoke of neurasthenia, of female hysteria, prescribing rest cures, laudanum, gentle treatment. For the poor, pale faces were not refined but sickly, proof of malnutrition and overwork. Their coughs were not delicately diagnosed but dismissed as consumption, or the inevitable lot of the poor. The same symptoms were a badge of status in one case, a mark of despair in the other. And consider childbirth. For wealthy women, doctors or trained midwives attended in private rooms, sometimes with chloroform at hand to ease the pain. Queen Victoria herself made pain relief respectable. For poor women, childbirth took place in crowded rooms, sometimes with no trained attendant at all. If they went to hospital, they faced childbed fever, spread from bed to bed by unwashed hands. Their survival depended on luck. Their infant's survival depended on even more. Even in death, the contrast showed. A wealthy family buried their loved one in a polished coffin, hired a doctor to sign a certificate, mourned with dignity. The poor often buried their dead in mass graves, bodies stacked, ceremonies rushed. Medicine had failed them, and society moved on. Yet the line was not always clean. Wealthy patients, despite their advantages, were not immune to addiction. Many respectable households hid bottles of laudanum, many pale daughters wasted away from fashionable tonics. Disease struck across class, though its bite was crueler where poverty reigned. Even so, when cholera swept through cities, it began in the slums, where sewage seeped into water and spread outward. The poor were blamed. Filth diseases, they were called, yet it was the structure of the city itself, the neglect of sanitation, that doomed them. Reformers saw this, and some fought to bridge the gap. Public health acts sought to bring clean water, sewage systems, sanitation. Hospitals slowly introduced reforms, separating wards, demanding cleanliness, though always first in wealthy districts. But progress came unevenly, and for decades the divide persisted. Imagine yourself now as two people at once. In one life, you are the child of a banker, taken to a seaside retreat for a lingering cough. You recover, nourished by rest and fresh air. In the other life, you are the child of a weaver, coughing in a damp tenement, soot from the factory clogging your lungs. Your mother doses you with syrup. You never see adulthood. Both lives are Victorian. Both are medicine. But only one survives. This was the cruel arithmetic of the age. Health was not only about remedies, but about wealth. Medicine was not only science, but status. To be rich was to have a chance. To be poor was to endure, and too often to die. And yet, even amid this stark divide, something new was stirring. The whisper of invisible enemies, germs, spread from lecture halls to wards. The practice of vaccination, once derided, gained respect. Sanitation reforms took root in cities. Slowly, painfully, the tide began to shift. The poor would not always be left to rot, the hospitals would not always stink of death. Science was awakening, and with it, a new vision of medicine was being born. Now the sound changes again. No longer the cries of the poor or the whispers of the wealthy, but the firm voices of scientists and reformers. We hear the scratch of chalk on blackboards, the clink of glass slides under microscopes, the hiss of carbolic spray in a surgical ward. Ahead lies the bright but uneasy dawn of modern medicine, the breakthroughs that began to banish the darkness. We are stepping now into segment 15, scientific breakthroughs, where germ theory, vaccines, and sanitation slowly turn the tide from poison to progress. The tenement fades, the townhouse vanishes, and in their place rises a new kind of space, the laboratory. It is not glamorous. The floors are cold, the benches cluttered with glass beakers and brass instruments, the air sharp with acids and the acrid smoke of lamps. But here, in rooms like this, the world of medicine begins to shift. The Victorian age, so often a theater of poisons and superstition, also birthed revolutions. And these revolutions, though fragile at first, would change everything. Imagine peering into a microscope for the first time. Not the crude lenses of earlier centuries, but the refined instruments of the 19th, crafted with precision. You place a drop of fluid on a glass slide, lower the lens, adjust the focus. And then, you see them. Shapes moving. Tiny, writhing, alive. Invisible to the naked eye, yet here undeniable. The world teems with life too small to see, and in that realization, a century of medicine begins to unravel. It is Louis Pasteur in France who shouts the loudest. He proves that fermentation, putrefaction, disease, these are not mystical processes, not products of bad air, but the work of microbes. He shows that heating wine kills the organisms that spoil it, that boiling milk makes it safe to drink. Pasteurization, they call it, and it is only the beginning. He whispers the word germ into the ears of a skeptical world, and though many scoff, others begin to listen. In Britain, Joseph Lister listens most intently. He looks at the festering wounds in his wards, at the endless deaths from gangrene and sepsis, and wonders, could Pasteur be right? Could it be these unseen creatures, not miasma, that devour his patients? He takes carbolic acid, harsh, pungent, stinging, and begins to use it. He sprays it into the air, onto wounds, onto instruments. He washes his hands in it, wraps bandages soaked in it. And the deaths begin to fall. Where once 9 out of 10 amputees perished, now half survive, then more. The old surgeons sneer at his fussiness, his obsession with cleanliness, but the results speak louder than tradition. Slowly, antiseptic surgery is born. Imagine standing in one of Lister's wards. The smell of carbolic acid burns your nose, sharp as vinegar, but beneath it is something else, the absence of rot. The wounds smell cleaner, the air fresher, the bandages less foul. Patients live where once they would have died. For the first time in centuries, the tide begins to turn against infection. Meanwhile, another battle is fought, not in operating theaters, but in the streets. Cholera has swept the cities again and again, striking hardest in the slums. Doctors still cling to miasma theory, blaming foul air. But John Snow, a London physician, dares to look elsewhere. He maps the deaths, house by house, and sees the pattern. They cluster around the Broad Street pump. He argues that cholera spreads not through air, but through water. He removes the pump handle, and the outbreak wanes. It is a simple act, but a radical one, and it plants the seed for modern epidemiology. From this comes sanitation reform. The Great Stink of 1858 forces Parliament to act, building Joseph Bazalgette's grand sewers under London. For the first time, waste is carried away instead of seeping into drinking water. Cholera retreats, grudgingly, as the city learns that health is not just about medicine, but about infrastructure. Clean water, clean streets, clean homes, these are cures as potent as any drug. Vaccination, too, grows stronger. Edward Jenner's cowpox discovery dates to the 18th century, but in the Victorian era it becomes systematized. Smallpox, the great scourge, begins to falter. At first there is resistance, fears of contamination, of government overreach. Anti-vaccination leagues protest, pamphlets rage. Yet slowly, the evidence piles up, those vaccinated live. Those unvaccinated die. The numbers speak with brutal clarity, and vaccination becomes law. The age of prevention is born. Consider how these breakthroughs change the very philosophy of medicine. For centuries, treatment had been reactive: cut, bleed, purge, dose. Now, for the first time, medicine begins to prevent, to protect, to build barriers before disease strikes. A child vaccinated against smallpox does not need laudanum or arsenic. A family with clean water does not need cholera tonics. A wound kept sterile does not need amputation. Progress reshapes not only practice, but possibility. Yet the path was not smooth. For every reformer, there were skeptics. Surgeons who scoffed at carbolic sprays, doctors who insisted bad air was the cause of cholera, citizens who feared vaccination more than disease. Change in medicine is never swift, never complete. It comes in patches, one ward cleansed, another festering, one city with sewers, another still drowning in filth. Progress and peril walk side by side, as they always had in the Victorian age. Picture again the patient on the operating table. In an older ward, he would be cut with unwashed tools, his wound festering until death. In Lister's ward, his surgeon pauses to wash his hands, his scalpel cleaned in carbolic acid, his wound dressed in antiseptic gauze. He survives. He walks again. The difference between life and death is no longer fate, it is science, and the willingness to believe it. And think of the child in the slums. Once, he would drink water from a pump and fall with cholera within days. Now, with sewers laid, with pumps clean, he drinks and lives. He grows, he works, he marries. His survival is not owed to syrups or pills, but to the unseen victory of engineers and reformers. Medicine extends beyond the doctor's bag. It reshapes the very city. And yet, for all these triumphs, darkness remained. Addiction still bound families to laudanum. Arsenic still glittered on faces. Patent cures still filled newspapers. The hospitals, though cleaner, still killed many. Progress had begun, but it had not yet conquered. The Victorian age was a battleground between old and new, between poison and prevention, between superstition and science. But from that struggle emerged the foundations of modern medicine. Germ theory, antiseptics, anesthesia, vaccination, sanitation, each a brick laid, not cleanly, not perfectly, but firmly enough to hold. Together they built the path out of the blood-soaked, foul-smelling labyrinth we have wandered. And now, as we near the end of our journey, the lamps grow dim. We have seen quacks and syrups, bloodletting and laudanum, poisons and progress. We have walked the wards, smelled the carbolic, heard the saws, felt the cloth of chloroform. What remains is reflection. What remains is the truth that every mistake, every horror, every grave dug too soon, was also a step, painful, fumbling, but real, toward the medicine we know today. We are walking now into the final chamber, the poisoned path to the future, where out of agony and error, modern healing was born. The laboratory fades, the clink of glass slides and hiss of carbolic spray dissolves into silence. We stand now in a long corridor of memory, lined with the echoes of everything we have seen. The faint cries of patients in filthy wards. The lullabies of mothers dosing their infants with syrup. The sharp rasp of saws cutting bone. The soft sweetness of chloroform on a cloth. Every sound, every scent lingers here, as if unwilling to let us leave. And yet, at the far end, a door waits, opening onto the world beyond, the world we live in now, shaped by all that pain. It is tempting to look back on the Victorian age with scorn, to laugh at bloodletting, to recoil from arsenic-faced powders, to sneer at quacks and cure-alls. But to do so would be to misunderstand. These people were not fools. They were desperate, searching, clinging to any thread of relief. The line between poison and progress was not clear in their day. It was blurred, shimmering like quicksilver. And in that blur, every step forward was one with blood. Think of the surgeon in his frock coat, stiff with stains. To us, he looks like a butcher. To his students, he was a hero of speed, a man saving lives in ways no barber surgeon of the past could. Think of the mother pouring laudanum into her child's spoon. To us, it is cruelty. To her, It was mercy, the only way to soothe hunger, pain, endless crying. Think of the chemist selling arsenic wafers for beauty. To us, it is vanity courting death. To the woman at her mirror, it was survival in a society that judged worth by pallor. Every horror we have walked through was also hope. Every poison was also a promise. And that is the true lesson of Victorian medicine. Progress is never clean, never gentle. It is built from failure, carved from suffering, hammered into shape by the mistakes of countless lives. Yet out of that furnace came truths that endure. Pasteur's microbes, Lister's antiseptics, Snow's pump handle, Jenner's vaccination, all born in this century of contradiction. Each discovery was ridiculed, resisted, delayed, and each, in time, remade the world. The clean hospital, the sterile instrument, the safe glass of water, the vaccinated child. We take them for granted now, never smelling the stench or hearing the cries that came before. Imagine standing in a modern hospital ward, white walls gleaming, instruments gleaming from autoclaves, doctors gloved and masked. It feels inevitable, natural, the only way it could be. But listen closely, and you can still hear the echoes of the Victorian theatre beneath it all, the saw, the screams, the carbolic spray. Progress walks on bones. Even now, the lesson matters. Medicine continues to stumble forward, imperfect, uneven. New drugs promise miracles, only to reveal hidden dangers. Treatments once hailed as breakthroughs are recalled in shame. We are not so different from the Victorians, dazzled by bright bottles and bold claims. The difference is only that we have more tools, more knowledge, more caution, but the edge of progress remains sharp, and we still walk it. So what, then, is the legacy of Victorian medicine? Not the poisons, not the mistakes, but the courage to push forward despite them. To cut into flesh though screams filled the room. To try mercury though death hovered nearby. To believe in microbes though no one could see them. To build sewers, to vaccinate children, to scrub hands raw with carbolic acid. The courage to imagine a future where illness did not mean surrender. The poison path is also a paved one. Every corpse carried from a hospital bed, every child silenced by syrup, every addict wasted by laudanum, every body buried in cholera's grip, all of them, unwillingly, helped light the way. Their suffering forced questions, and questions led to answers. Their deaths were not in vain, though they did not know it. They are stitched into the fabric of every clean sheet, every sterile scalpel, every safe vaccine today. And so we leave the Victorian age not with mockery, but with a kind of reverence. For its brutality, yes. For its ignorance, certainly. But also for its strange, stubborn, stumbling march towards something better. Picture once more that corridor of memory. At one end, the blood-stained saw, the bottle of laudanum, the vial of arsenic powder. At the other, the shining scalpel, the sterile syringe, the safe bottle of water. Between them stretches the path, uneven, paved with bones and bottles alike. That is the poison path to the future, and it is the path that brought us here. And now, as the echoes fade, the door at the far end opens. Light spills through, bright and clean, the light of our own age. Step through, and breathe deep. The air smells of nothing, no rot, no chloroform, no carbolic sting. Just air. Clean, invisible, taken for granted. And as we walk forward, the past settles behind us, whispering still but no longer binding. The story is done. The lamps are out. The wards are quiet. The syrup stops clinking, the saw stops rasping, the cries fall silent. What remains is reflection. What remains is gratitude. And so, as the night settles, may these echoes of the past guide you gently into dreams, reminding you that every comfort you know was once carved from terror, and every safe breath you take was once paid for in blood.